because he is a Carolina guy, and you would be able to clearly attract better talent to Carolina than you would Vanderbilt, just based off of the history of Carolina basketball and the prestige that comes with wearing a Carolina uniform. So I don't think that it's impossible. I also don't think that it would be the worst hire that you could make. But I do think that as of right now, I think Wes Miller and Hubert Davis are probably seen better hires at the moment than Jerry Stackhouse.
Another guy that's very much going to be in the discussion. Ultimately, I don't think will be the head coach, and there's a very good chance he may retire from coaching a lot like Roy Williams, is Steve Robinson, who's a current assistant for North Carolina. The move to make him the head coach would pretty much be similar to when Dean Smith retired and handed the keys off to Bill Guthridge after Bill Guthridge stood by Dean Smith's side for, I believe it was 32 of his 36 seasons in Chapel Hill, turned down job opportunities like at Kansas State and Penn State to be the top assistant for Carolina. But with Steve, the thing that makes him interesting is that while he's an assistant head coach, he's got head coaching experience both at Cornell and at Florida State. He was the head coach there before things didn't go really well, and then Leonard Hamilton came in, took over for him, and we've seen what Leonard Hamilton has done with that program down in Tallahassee. I just feel like we saw what happened with the program going to Bill Guthridge and what happened afterwards. During Guthridge's time as head coach, you experienced great success. He went to 2 Final Fours in 3 years. He won the most games, I believe, in a 3-year span at the time in program history before Roy Williams, of course, came in and did what he did. But that move, in a lot of ways, set the progression of the program back. Do you agree that making Steve Robinson the head coach would kind of do that with the program right now?
I don't. I think that it's a different situation that you're in this time, I think, than last time. Because, I mean, we've talked to Coach Doherty before, and we've heard from Coach Doherty himself. He admits to us that he should have listened to Dean Smith more. I feel like if what you would be doing with this move, and this may have been what they were doing at the time. It probably was, but the media coverage wasn't as heavy. I don't think there was ever an official statement released on this. They were, in that moment, they were trying to buy time to try to reconvince Roy Williams. This one would be a little bit different, but they would be buying time as well in this one. And this one would be to get one of, either the 2 or 3 guys that we just mentioned, because I think that there would be then a case for Jerry Stackhouse if he was able to sort of turn Vanderbilt into a competitor in the SEC. Maybe even if he was to go back to the G League and have success or whatever, right? Be an assistant coach on an NBA staff, help them to build the team into a competitor. He could be in the conversation as well. But it would mainly be to figure out whether Wes Miller or Hubert Davis was really ready to take over. I don't think it's all that likely. I think that Steve Robinson would be a guy that would still allow you to be successful because he's going to run things a lot like Roy Williams has run them over the last few seasons, mainly throughout his entire time at Carolina. I don't know, how successful Carolina would actually be able to be because, you look at the fact that a lot of people want a modernized system. That wouldn't happen under Steve Robinson.
Right.
Seriously, he's going to do pretty much the same things that Roy did. He may, by promoting, I would imagine, promoting Kendall Marshall up from, role where he sits behind the bench to a role where he sits where Sean May sits right now. I think that could definitely help to sort of modernize some of the things that they do. But I think that would be that's the only reason that they would do that is if they just did not feel confident in the fact that Wes Miller or Hubert Davis were ready to take over the job right now. They were trying to buy just a little bit more time. I don't see it. I definitely think that when you look at some of the more attractive scenarios in terms of going in family, he say number 3. I would actually take him over Jerry Stackhouse
Yeah, me too.
now. But I don't think that a lot of people see it that way. I really don't. I feel like a lot of people think there's a better chance that he is not part of the staff next year. He will retire himself.
A couple more before we get out here because I know it is getting really late. Another guy that you and I both mentioned in our article is Gerard Haas, the current head coach at Stanford. And if you've been around Carolina basketball long enough before he left to take the head coaching job at UAB and now at Stanford, he still gets talked about Roy Williams as one of Roy Williams' favorite players and a guy that he's one of his top 5 dudes of all time and was one of the guys that came as close to caring as much as Roy Williams cared when he played for him at Kansas. He played his final NCAA tournament with a sprained wrist on his shooting arm, and I played with a torn ACL, and I joke about that because that didn't happen, but he actually played with a sprained wrist and shot the ball like that and almost took Kansas to the Final Four. He gives you the head coaching experience where he's been at UAB. He actually upset Carolina one year down there in Birmingham and has a upset of Iowa State in the NCAA tournament as a 14 seed. That run at Birmingham with UAB got him the head coaching job at Stanford. That has led to some very uneven and mediocre success. He's coached against the Tar Heels 3 times while he's been out there in Palo Alto, going 0-3. He's failed to get the Cardinal to the NCAA tournament. He brought in a top-tier recruit this year in Zaire Williams, a guy that actually chose Stanford over North Carolina. And so he brings the ability to recruit high-level talent. But with Jerry Stackhouse, that hasn't led to on-court success. The only reason I feel like he's a candidate for this job is because he does have a lot of head coaching experience that Bubba Cunningham, well, although he isn't required, he does prefer the next guy to have.
Well, I think the recruiting success is definitely a big part of it as well. We were talking earlier tonight about this. I mean, Zaire Williams committed to him over some pretty significant schools, and a lot of people were saying, well, he just wanted to stay close to home. Well, he could have also gone elsewhere in state, including to a team, and I know we didn't know it at the time, clearly, but a team that just played in the Final Four in UCLA, a program on the rise in USC that's been on the rise for a few years now. So for him to end up getting him there, that was big. There's no denying. But I think you did a really good job of laying out what is a confusing resume for him because, he had some success in his time at UAB. He took them to the NCAA tournament twice, but he also had some years that weren't great there. Then moves on, gets a bigger job with Stanford, comes in, hasn't had a ton of success there, but hasn't been awful either. Hasn't been, to the point where they've been looking to fire him. Last year probably would have been the first time that he would have made the NCAA tournament. You wonder if that may have helped them out a little bit more on the recruiting trail, if he would have been able to land, another significant guy outside of Zaire Williams, maybe not on the same level, but definitely helped them out a lot to see them make the tournament because it's been a while since that team made the tournament. They last made it under Johnny Dawkins, who had success there as well. And that's also a school that, like I was telling you earlier tonight, it may surprise people how successful they've been when it's come to their basketball history. So I definitely think that he's got a case. I don't think it's as strong as any of the guys that we laid out, especially with the fact that his connection to Carolina is just that he was on Roy Williams' staff. But I do think that if you do start getting down the list a little bit, there'll be a name that you'll start hearing pop up. And I'll put it this way, I don't think that he would be the worst guy that you could hire. I think that he's a guy that was on the Tar Heel staff. As you mentioned, Roy Williams has talked about him as being an extremely likable guy. So there are probably a lot of guys that will be willing to help him, guys that are currently on the staff that would say that's one of the guys where I think if he comes in and takes over as head coach, I think Steve Robinson probably would stay on the staff, try to get some other former assistants to possibly come out and help him. You would imagine Stevie McGrath would probably join the bench once again. And I do think that he's a guy that would keep some of the former players around as well and would allow them to be a part of the coaching staff. So I don't feel like it would be the worst hire that you could make, but I definitely feel like it could be an underwhelming one.
Let's talk about one last guy that we both mentioned, and then we'll touch on some guys that we have that are different from one another, and that's Mark Turgeon, a guy that never played for Roy Williams but was a part of Roy Williams' staff when Roy Williams got the Kansas job in 1988 and coached with Roy until 1992 before he left with Jerry Green. When Jerry Green left to go to Oregon, he went to Oregon, and then he went to the NBA before coming back to the college game. And Turgeon is a guy that many people, you got to know Roy Williams to know Mark Turgeon because he thanked him in his press conference. A lot of people are probably wondering, well, who the heck's that guy? Well, that guy, Mark Turgeon, is the guy that has the most success coaching at the college level that has a tie to Roy Williams. He's been at Jacksonville State, Wichita State, Texas A&M, and now Maryland. He took Wichita State to the Sweet 16 in 2016. That run got him the job in College Station, where he won 49 games his first 2 years, the most ever in the first two seasons by a college coach there with the Aggies. And he made the tournament, I think, every year while he was there. Never made it past the round of 32, but for Texas A&M basketball, just making the tournament most years is a success, let alone winning a game in the NCAA tournament. That kind of success there got him the job in Maryland. And Maryland's not an easy job. He was replacing the late, great Gary Williams, who went on to retirement as Maryland was exiting out of the ACC and making their way into the Big Ten. And while adjusting to a new conference and learning how to recruit and play in that style, Turgeon's won 221 games. Maryland is a consistent team that makes the NCAA tournament. They made the Sweet 16 back in 2016. This wouldn't be a slam dunk hire because a lot of Tar Heel fans that don't really follow college basketball outside of Carolina aren't going to know who he is. But he brings a level of experience that no other candidate that is we're listing outside of the Jay Wrights, the Mark Fewes, and the Brad Stevens can match. So your take on Mark Turgeon being involved to be the next head coach in Chapel Hill?
I mean, it would be a solid hire, but it wouldn't be a mind-blowing. I think, one thing that is interesting is you talked about Jay Wright being 59. Mark was 58. He's 56, so a couple of years younger.
Mm-hmm.
And you could probably get 12 to 15 good years out of him. It was to come to Chapel Hill. But, I think this is one where you're going to have to get down a list to be able to start to bring him into consideration. But I think if you are really looking outside of the family, that is the one route that you're really looking to go. I mean, he does have the tie to Roy for sure, and I think he's the guy that Roy would tell you. I mean, if you went and started having conversations with him and went to Roy and asked him if he would be behind that hire, he definitely would. But I do think that he's got a pretty solid track record as well that backs it up, that would make him solid enough. Like you mentioned, I mean, replacing Gary Williams, we're talking about how tough it is to replace Roy Williams here at Carolina. Roy Williams had Dean Smith that came before him. Gary Williams is easily, hands down, the best coach in Maryland basketball history. There is no doubt about that. And he had a tough task of replacing him. And to be honest with you, he's done a pretty solid job. As you mentioned, he moved out of the ACC, a conference that they were, comfortable in and really had established some great history into the Big Ten, a conference that, at the time when they entered the Big Ten, really wasn't all that great. But as we've watched over the last couple of years, at the top has become year in and year out a better conference at the top than the ACC is. It was a tough conference to play in. It's a tough conference to win in. And we saw him once again this year come out, win a game in the NCAA tournament that nobody expected them to win. And for the most part, until late in that game, give Alabama all they could handle. So, I mean, he's a good coach. But I don't think, I would say that I don't think he's a great coach. I think the biggest thing about him would be, kind of what we heard when we talked about Matt Brown's hire for the football program. That would be, who are you putting around him? What kind of staff are you building for him?